The wrench slipped. James Foster caught it before it hit the concrete floor, his reflexes fast even after 9 straight hours hunched over the exposed engine of a $300,000 Veyron. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a faint streak of grease across his temple, and leaned back in to tighten the last bolt on the fuel injection assembly. The garage was quiet at this hour. Most of the other mechanics had clocked out 2 hours ago. James preferred it this way, just him, the cars, and the particular silence that came after the dealership doors locked. He stood, stretched his back until it cracked in 3 places, and stepped back to look at the engine. It was beautiful if you knew what you were looking at. A reimagined combustion system, modified intake manifolds, a cooling configuration he had sketched out on a napkin at his daughter Sophie's school pickup line 6 months ago. Montgomery Motors' most anticipated model yet, a track-ready beast that was supposed to debut at the Geneva showcase in 11 days. James had poured everything into it. Nights, weekends, the quiet hours after Sophie fell asleep when most men his age were watching television or calling friends. He photographed the completed assembly with his phone, logged the final notes in the maintenance system, and grabbed his jacket from the hook near the tool station. He turned off the overhead lights, and for just a moment in the darkness, he let himself feel the small, private satisfaction of a man who knows he has done something extraordinary, even if no one else does yet. He drove home through the empty streets of the city thinking about Sophie's science project, which was due Thursday, and whether there was enough milk in the refrigerator for her cereal in the morning. He did not think about Ava Montgomery, because men like James Foster never imagined that the storm was already forming. Ava Montgomery walked into Montgomery Motors at 7:14 the following morning, 16 minutes before the official opening, wearing a charcoal blazer and the particular expression her executive assistant described privately as the Tuesday face. It was not a good face. It meant Ava had slept 4 hours, read 12 industry reports before sunrise, and found something in at least one of them that displeased her. She moved through the showroom floor the way she always did, eyes scanning, heels clicking against the polished marble, chin slightly raised as if she were measuring the air itself for imperfections. The sales team stood a little straighter. The receptionist smiled a little wider. Ava did not smile back, not because she was deliberately cruel, but because Ava Montgomery had been raised by a father who told her that a smile without a reason was a wasted expression, and she had never fully unlearned it. She pushed through the glass door into the service bay and stopped. The Veyron sat in the center stall under the examination lights. Her senior engineer, Marcus Webb, was crouched beside it with 2 junior technicians, and from the angle of Marcus's shoulders alone, tight, hunched, the posture of a man trying to make himself smaller, Ava knew before anyone said a word that something was wrong. "Talk," she said. Marcus straightened slowly. He had worked for Ava for 6 years, and he still hadn't figured out how to deliver bad news to her in a way that felt safe. "There's a variance in the fuel delivery timing," he said. "The engine ran a diagnostic this morning. The output fluctuation is small, but it's there." "How small?" "About 4% under peak load." 4%, Ava repeated it the way a judge repeats a sentence, letting the weight of it settle in the room. "The Geneva showcase is in 11 days, Marcus. 4% is not small. 4% on a track means the difference between first place and an embarrassing breakdown in front of every automotive journalist in Europe." She walked closer to the car, bent forward, and looked at the engine without touching it, as if she were reading it. "Who worked on this?" Marcus hesitated. That hesitation cost him. "Who?" Ava said again, the word shorter this time. "The fuel assembly was completed last night by James Foster." Ava didn't know the name immediately. She knew faces and results and quarterly numbers, but she managed over 200 employees across 3 locations, and she could not attach a face to James Foster in that moment. What she could attach was accountability. "Get him in here," she said. "Now." James arrived at the dealership 37 minutes later, still pulling his jacket on as he came through the service bay entrance. He had dropped Sophie at school, kissed her forehead, told her not to forget her lunch bag, the green one, not the blue one, because the blue one had a broken zipper, and then gotten the call from Marcus that Ms. Montgomery wanted to see him. The call had been professional enough on Marcus's end, but James had heard something underneath it, something careful. He saw Ava standing with her arms folded near the Veyron, and he understood immediately. He had been in this industry long enough to read a room. "James Foster," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You completed the fuel injection assembly on this vehicle last night." "I did." "Then you can explain to me why the engine is showing a 4% output variance under peak load conditions." James looked at the car. He did not panic. He had been building and diagnosing engines since he was 17 years old, learning beside his father in a garage that smelled of oil and sawdust, and panic was a luxury that mechanics could not afford. He walked toward the car, but Ava held up a hand. "Don't touch it yet, I want to understand what happened first. If I could just run a secondary." I said not yet, her voice was flat and absolute. "What happened?" James straightened. "With respect, Ms. Montgomery, a 4% variance under load is within a correctable range. It's most likely a calibration offset in the injection timing sequence, which I can have adjusted within 2 hours. It's not a structural issue." "That's not what I asked." He held her gaze. "I built that engine, Ms. Montgomery, every component in that assembly. I know it better than anyone in this building. I'm asking you to give me 2 hours to fix it." Something moved across Ava's face, a flicker of something that might have been consideration or might have been irritation, and then it was gone. "You have the rest of the morning," she said. "If it's not resolved by noon, we'll have a different conversation." She turned and walked back through the glass door, and the service bay exhaled. Marcus came and stood beside James. "She means it," he said quietly. "I know," James said, and reached for his tools. He worked with everything he had. He pulled the diagnostic data, cross-referenced it against the design specifications he had written himself. And within 40 minutes he had identified the issue, a marginal calibration drift in one of the injection sensors, likely caused by temperature fluctuation in the garage overnight. It was, exactly as he had told Ava, correctable, not negligence, not failure, the ordinary imperfection of a machine responding to its environment. He recalibrated the sensor, ran a bench test, watched the numbers align themselves like soldiers snapping to attention. He ran the diagnostic again. The variance was gone. The output was clean, precise, exactly what it was supposed to be. He stood back, satisfied, and began writing up the report. He did not know that Ava had come back into the service bay 20 minutes earlier and spoken to someone else. He did not know that the someone else was Derek Haynes, a senior technician who had quietly resented James's elevated status in the garage for the better part of 2 years, and who had chosen this particular morning to suggest to Ms. Montgomery, in a tone that was carefully calibrated to sound like concern rather than sabotage, that perhaps the issue wasn't a simple calibration drift, that perhaps it reflected a pattern. That perhaps Foster had been cutting corners lately, given everything on his plate at home. He did not know any of this. He was writing his report, the numbers clean and perfect in front of him, genuinely believing that the problem was solved. That was when Ava came back. "Ms. Montgomery," he said, looking up, "I've resolved the..." "I've made a decision," she said. Her voice was not raised, that was almost worse. "Effective immediately, your employment with Montgomery Motors is terminated." The garage went silent. Not the comfortable silence of earlier that morning, this was a different kind, the silence that fills a space when something irreversible has just been said. James felt it hit him the way cold water hits you, sudden and everywhere at once. "I fixed it," he said. "The variance is gone. I ran the diagnostic twice. The issue is not exclusively the engine, Mr. Foster. It's a question of standard and accountability. I didn't do anything wrong. Security will escort you to collect your personal items." She did not look away from him. She was not cruel in this moment, she was certain, and in some ways that was worse because certainty cannot be argued with. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." Inconvenience? The word landed somewhere low in his chest. He thought of Sophie. He thought of the mortgage, the school fees, the specific, fragile architecture of a single father's budget where every brick was load-bearing. He thought of the napkin sketch in his jacket pocket, the one for the next modification, the turbocharger reconfiguration he had been meaning to propose to the engineering team. He didn't say any of these things. James Foster was not a man who begged. He set his diagnostic tablet on the workbench, picked up his jacket, and walked toward the exit with the kind of dignity that costs a man everything to maintain. At the door he stopped. He turned back, not at Ava but at Marcus, who was standing against the far wall looking at the floor. "The secondary coolant sensor needs to be replaced before Geneva," James said. "Not the calibration, the physical sensor. It'll fail under sustained load. I noticed it last week. It's in my maintenance log." Then he walked out. The drive to Sophie's school felt longer than it was. He picked her up at the end of the day as he always did, standing at the gate with the other parents, and she came out in a burst of energy the way 7-year-olds do, pigtails slightly undone, backpack half open, a painting in her hand that she thrust at him before he could even say hello. "I made the sun orange," she announced. "Mrs. Carter said suns are yellow, but I told her the sun is actually all colors and she said that's interesting." "That's very interesting," James said and folded the painting carefully and tucked it under his arm and took her hand and walked to the car and did not tell her anything. That night after Sophie was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table for a long time with his hands flat on the surface. The apartment was quiet. There was a drawing she had made of the two of them taped to the refrigerator, him with broad shoulders and a big smile, her with pigtails and a cloud above her head that said "Daddy fixes everything." He looked at it for a while. Then he opened his laptop and started updating his resume. Ava worked late. She always worked late. It was not a habit so much as a state of being. After the staff had gone home, after the showroom was locked and the lights in the service bay reduced to the overnight setting, she sat at her desk with the Geneva timeline spread across her second monitor and the quarterly projections on her first, and tried to focus. She couldn't. This was unusual. Ava Montgomery's ability to focus was legendary in her industry. She had once negotiated a $14 million supplier contract during a transatlantic flight through severe turbulence, and the other party had described her later as having the emotional temperature of a high-functioning glacier. She considered this a compliment. But she kept coming back to the look on James Foster's face when she had said the word inconvenience. Not the shock, not the anger, those she expected. It was something else. The specific exhaustion of a person who has done everything right and still lost. She recognized it because she had felt it once years ago before she learned to build walls thick enough that nothing could get to the face. She picked up her phone and called Marcus. He answered on the third ring, the cautious hello of a man who knows that when his CEO calls at 9:30 at night, it is not a social occasion. "Tell me about James Foster," she said. A pause. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." Another pause longer. "Ava," Marcus almost never used her first name, "how much time do you have?" What Marcus told her took 20 minutes, and by the end of it Ava was standing at her office window looking at the empty dealership floor below with the particular stillness of someone who has just understood that they have made a catastrophic mistake. James Foster had not been a mechanic who also happened to work on engines. James Foster was the reason her company's race division existed at all. The proprietary combustion configuration that had won Montgomery Motors 3 consecutive track titles, Foster's design. The lightweight suspension geometry that Automotive magazines had called a decade ahead of its time, Foster's concept, sketched out during lunch breaks and refined after hours. The custom-built Veyron engine that was supposed to take Geneva by storm, Foster had not just assembled it. He had invented it from first principles in his spare time without being asked, because that was the kind of man he was. "He's been submitting improvement proposals for 2 years, Marcus said, his voice carrying something Ava did not immediately identify as quiet accusation. "Engineering review keeps deprioritizing them. He never complains, he just keeps showing up and keeps building things." "Why didn't I know this?" Her voice was measured, but the question was real. It was not rhetorical. She genuinely wanted to understand how this had happened. "Because he's in the service bay and you're on the executive floor," Marcus said, "and nobody built a bridge." After she hung up, she stood at the window for a long time. The showroom below was full of cars that James Foster had in some significant way made possible. Millions of dollars of engineering innovation sitting under the lights, and she had just fired the man responsible for all of it because of a calibration drift and a comment from someone with a grudge. She thought about what she had said to the board just last quarter, that Montgomery Motors' competitive edge was its people, that the company's culture of excellence depended on recognizing talent at every level. She had said it confidently, with slides and data, and she had believed it was true. She picked up her phone and found the number Marcus had sent her. She called it. It rang 4 times, then voicemail. "Mr. Foster," she said, "this is Ava Montgomery. She stopped, started again. "I need to speak with you, please call me back." She stared at the phone after she hung up. In 15 years of running companies, she had apologized to a board, to investors, to suppliers, and once to a journalist she had been unnecessarily short with at a press conference. She had not, until tonight, called a fired employee from her personal number at 9:45 in the evening and found herself at a loss for words. She did not sleep. James saw the missed call in the morning. He stared at it over his coffee, Sophie's cereal bowl between them, Sophie herself narrating something about a disagreement with a classmate over whether dolphins were smarter than dogs. He said dolphins, probably on autopilot, and kept staring at Ava Montgomery's number. He did not call back. She called again at 8:15 while he was walking back from dropping Sophie off. He let it ring. She called a third time at 9. He picked up on the last ring before it went to voicemail, not because he had decided to, he hadn't, but because some stubborn, curious part of him needed to hear what she would say. "Mr. Foster?" Her voice was different. It took him a second to identify what was different about it, and then he realized the certainty was gone. It had been replaced by something more human and considerably less comfortable. "Thank you for answering. Ms. Montgomery, I owe you an apology that I'm not sure how to make adequately. I've been fully informed this time of your contributions to this company, and I made a decision yesterday based on incomplete information and frankly on the word of someone whose motivations I should have examined more carefully. That was wrong. I was wrong." A pause. "I would like you to come back." James leaned against a wall on the street watching a taxi navigate a narrow turn. He had expected the call. He had not expected her to sound like this, stripped of performance, careful with her words. "To fix the engine," he said. "To build whatever comes next." He was quiet for a moment. "With respect, Ms. Montgomery, you fired me in front of my colleagues. You called it an inconvenience. You didn't ask me a single question before you made the decision. You assumed." "Yes," she said, "I did. That happens a lot in my experience with men like me in positions like mine. I'm the guy who makes the thing work. And when something goes wrong, the first question isn't what happened. It's who do we blame? And the answer is always the guy with the wrench." "You're right. I need you to understand that coming back isn't just about a salary negotiation," he said. "I have a daughter. She is 7 years old. Yesterday I went home and I didn't know how I was going to explain to her why things might need to change. That is not something I can treat as a professional disagreement that got sorted out." There was a silence on the line that felt, to James's surprise, genuine, not strategic, not the silence of someone calculating their next argument. "I understand," Ava said, "or I'm beginning to, and I know that me saying I'm sorry doesn't repair what yesterday cost you, but I'm asking you to give me the opportunity to make it mean something, not just to come back and fix the engine, but to actually sit at the table. Your name on the designs, Director of Engineering. Full creative authority over the race division. And if you want to leave at 3 o'clock on Tuesdays because of something Sophie has at school, that's not a conversation you need to have with anyone." He stood very still on the sidewalk. "You know her name." "Marcus told me. He also told me you're the best engineer he's ever worked with, and Marcus has worked with 7 teams across 4 countries. A pause. "Please come in, not today if you don't want, but when you're ready." James looked up at the sky. It was overcast, the gray particular kind that could go either way, storm or sun, you never knew until later. "I'll come in Thursday," he said. When he walked into the service bay on Thursday morning, the entire team was there. Marcus, the junior technicians, 3 members of the design team he rarely interacted with. Derek Haynes was notably absent. Marcus had handled that conversation separately and efficiently. Ava was there too. She was standing near the Veyron, and when James walked in, she crossed the floor and extended her hand. "Thank you for coming back," she said, and shook his hand and met his eyes, and there was nothing performed about it. "Let's look at the car," he said. They worked side by side that morning for the first time. Ava had an engineering background, not as deep as James's, but real, built over years of necessity in a family business that didn't have the budget to hire experts for everything. She had mostly buried it under the requirements of running an empire. Standing in the service bay listening to James explain the turbocharger reconfiguration, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, the specific pleasure of learning something from someone who is genuinely better than you at the thing they're explaining. "Why didn't you just propose these modifications through the standard review process?" she asked. "I did," James said without accusation, "twice." She nodded slowly. "That changes after today." He showed her the secondary coolant sensor he had flagged before he was fired. It was showing early signs of thermal fatigue exactly as he had predicted. They replaced it together, Ava passing tools, James working, the two of them settling into a rhythm that felt, against all odds, natural. "Can I ask you something personal?" Ava said as James torqued the last fitting. "Depends on the question. How do you do it? The work, the precision, the innovation, all of it while raising Sophie alone." James set the torque wrench down. He was quiet for a moment and she thought he might not answer. My wife was the kind of person who made you want to be better, he said finally. She was a teacher. She thought the most important thing a person could do was build something that outlasted them. I think about that a lot. When I'm designing an engine, I'm building something real, something that works, that matters. He glanced at her. Sophie watches me work sometimes. She draws engines. They're mostly circles with lines through them, but still. Ava looked at the Veyron. Your wife sounds like she was extraordinary. She was, James said simply. They were quiet for a moment, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who have, unexpectedly, reached a place of mutual understanding. The Geneva showcase came on a cold, clear morning 11 days later. The Veyron sat in the presentation bay under the lights, every line precise, every component exactly where it was supposed to be. James stood off to the side with Marcus and watched the automotive press move around the car with the particular reverence that people reserve for things that are unmistakably excellent. Ava was at the podium. She was in her element here, controlled, articulate, commanding the room's attention with the ease of someone who has done this 1,000 times. She talked about the vehicle's specifications, about Montgomery Motors' vision, about innovation and precision and the future of performance engineering. Then she stopped, and she said something that was not in the prepared remarks. Before I finish, I want to acknowledge the person most responsible for what you're looking at today. James Foster is our director of engineering. He designed the engine in this car. He designed the engine in our last 3 championship vehicles. He has been doing it quietly and excellently for years. Montgomery Motors is what it is because of people like James, and I want to say publicly that we are better for knowing it. She found him in the crowd. James. The room turned. James stood very still for a moment. He was not a man who sought attention, and being found by it felt briefly disorienting. Then he nodded once, a small acknowledgement, and the room applauded. Sophie was watching a video of it later that evening, on Ava's company tablet, which Ava had brought personally to their apartment along with enough takeout containers to feed significantly more than 3 people. Sophie watched the applause with the serious attention of a child who is processing something important. "That's you," she said to James. "That's me. They clapped for you." "They did." She considered this. "Mrs. Carter should see this," she said finally. "Then maybe she'll believe me about the son." James laughed. It was the full, unguarded kind, the laugh of a man who has remembered how. He looked across the table at Ava, who was watching Sophie with an expression that had in it something complicated and something simple at the same time, the look of someone who is beginning to understand what they had almost thrown away. "Thank you," he said to her, quietly enough that Sophie, now explaining the son theory to no one in particular, didn't hear. "Thank you," Ava said, "for coming back." Outside the window, the city moved through its evening, taxis and voices and the particular energy of a place that does not stop. Inside the apartment, Sophie was drawing an engine on a paper napkin, all circles and determined lines, explaining to Ava that the arrows represented the airflow and that her dad had taught her that. James watched his daughter teach the most powerful woman in the industry how an engine worked, on a napkin, over takeout containers, and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for a very long time. Not the satisfaction of recognition, though that was there. Something quieter and more durable. The feeling of a man who knows that the people around him see him, not just his work, not just his usefulness, but him, and that this, more than any prize or press conference, was what it had all been for. He looked at the drawing Sophie had taped to the refrigerator. Daddy fixes everything. He was beginning to think that maybe, this time, something had fixed itself. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share.